Hi, I'm Warwick from Harder and Steenbeck, and keeping with our question and answer series, one of the questions that we've had in is so broad in its potential scope of answer that we've actually decided to make a whole video dedicated to this one question. And the question is, what are your top 3 do's and don'ts with airbrushing? I think everybody who's watched any of our content so far probably already knows the top don't, which is without any shadow of a doubt. It is definitely don't ever leave paint to dry in your airbrush. Doesn't matter what you got to get up to go and do. If you're leaving your workbench, you want to get some cleaner in there and flush it through until it's spraying clear, okay? Because I don't know if you're anything like me, but if something drags me away from the workbench and I've got to go and see to something, I might be away for 2 minutes, I might be away for 20. I might be away for 2 hours, depends on what happens as soon as I get up. So you've got to kind of factor that into your planning. So if you're going to leave the workbench, first thing you do, spray out the color, dump some cleaner in, spray it out till it's spraying clear, and then you can walk away. And if you don't manage to get back for another 2 hours, you haven't created a gigantic problem for yourself. So that's definitely my number one. Also plays into this question of what's the best end of day routine for the airbrush? Well, the best end of day routine for the airbrush is the same as the best routine for changing color in the airbrush, as long as you don't work in a way that has your airbrush systematically getting into worse and worse condition as you go through the painting session. So do try to avoid that in any way you can, really. And that recommendation of if you ever have to get up from the workbench or you have to prep something else or whatever, just spray the color out, put some cleaner in, spray that through till it's spraying clear, and then your airbrush will treat you with the respect that you accord to it. So that's my number one don't. My number one do, I'm going to say, is I think it's to really appreciate the thing at which the airbrush is best at. Okay, really understand what that is, you know, and then whatever your skill level is, if you truly understand what the airbrush's biggest strength is, you will find satisfaction and joy from the airbrush no matter what your level is. And this is what it is, okay? The airbrush's number one skill or task that it's useful for is spraying color down in a way that makes it really, really vibrant, okay? Now, anybody can do that. Even a beginner on day one can do that. So if you're finding that the airbrush is really difficult, really frustrating for a certain task that you're trying to use it for, just ask yourself the question if the airbrush is the right tool or should you be using something else. So if you're trying to use an airbrush to do things that are really easy with a brush, why would you do that? Use a brush for that. So use the airbrush where it is the most joyful tool that you can pick up. And for me, that's control of color, control of shade, control of blending, and being able to exploit the texture on a model using the airbrush. I think those are the areas where I would sort of say that's my top do, is use the airbrush at what it's really, really great at. And actually that's a good piece of advice for any of your creative tools. Use the tool at what it's absolutely best at, because that kind of makes the using experience the most joyful that it can be. And I think that's really what we're all looking for in our creativity. So getting down the list to, you know, the number 2 and the number 3, I think in terms of don'ts, maybe my answers are a little bit colored by the fact that I'm a bit of a technical guy nowadays, I suppose, but I would put up there pretty high, and this is not up there because I'm trying to get you to buy stuff. If you think you've damaged a part, like if you think you've damaged a needle, for example, don't sort of try to tell yourself that there's a way that you can still use it, okay? Because it just generates frustration. It might damage your nozzle. Just get rid of that thing. Bent needles are always super useful for other things. So keep them, don't throw them away. But don't use them in your airbrush. Don't try to straighten them. Don't try to sharpen them. Just get a new one. Harder and Steenbeck, we've always really made the effort to keep our needle prices really reasonable. We're always looking to improve the material. We did that 2 or 3 years ago to something that's much more robust, and a needle design that is in itself much more robust. But even so, the point still goes, a bent needle just creates so much more aggravation than it's worth and might damage your nozzle as well, and that's just not worth doing. So I think bent needles, straight out the airbrush, put a new one that's not in. That's definitely up there with my top recommendations as well because of the frustration that it can generate. So I'd really put that up there. Number 2 do would probably be, yeah, I'm quite big on this one, your hand posture. So take a hand posture that's comfortable. My personal preference is I like to see people holding the airbrush like this, okay? So it's kind of quite open across the palm, quite flat across your knuckles, so that you're not gripping and making this kind of very closed palm, because it just makes it less intuitive to aim and point in a natural way. And also it can get you some cramps across your hand, which nobody wants to have that when they're trying to work their way through a project. So try to hold the airbrush in the least grippy way possible, and the most light, you're pointing at what you want to hit with your trigger finger. It makes the aiming really intuitive. So that's, I think, worth a little bit of thought when you're starting out with the airbrush. Getting down to number 3, number 3 on the don'ts is don't be discouraged if you make a mistake, because today's mistake is often an effect that's really useful tomorrow. So every time you make a mistake and you have a kind of an oh beep moment with the airbrush, just take 10 seconds to take a look at that and wonder how you did it, number 1, because that's useful to solving it, but also useful to remembering it, because it might be useful in another circumstance on another project. And then number 3 do with the airbrush, I'm going to say, yeah, I think this is kind of important too. Keep a notepad at the side of your workstation. And when you have little eureka moments of things, just make a note and just keep those always there, like a little book of great advice about the airbrush. And loads of things can go in there. What I generally find people who adopt this little tip of mine is a lot of people tend to keep color recipes in there because there's really nothing worse than creating a job on a model or on a canvas or on a helmet or whatever it is that you're painting, and having part of that with the airbrush, to my way of thinking, so much of the joy of the airbrush is caught up in the way that we exploit and create color. And there's nothing worse than doing a job that's particularly enjoyable because you've made a shade of color that just seems to be so vibrant and perfect for that subject, and then forgetting what you used to create that, because oftentimes we'll mix in the cup using a drop of this and a drop of that. So if you create something that's just absolutely amazing for a certain purpose, just note that paint recipe down in your book vaguely. It might just be approximately 50 of this and 50 of that, but note it down and what you used it for. The model or the piece that you used it on, the approximate description of the color and what went into it. And I think that's really, really useful, because it can really help you when you sit down to take on another project and you know that it has a certain look or feel. And then you can remember, what have I got in my book about that? And you can just kind of run through it. And it's almost like if you're putting together, a mixtape and you're able to look at the greatest hits of the last 10 years, it's going to give you some pretty good inspiration for that mixtape. So I think keeping a little book by the side of your table where you can note down your victories or your best color recipes, I just think that's a wonderful way to keep the best to hand. Hope you enjoyed those. As ever, it's great for us to get a like and a subscribe to the channel, and particularly to get your feedback. So on this video, what would be awesome for us is if you could leave your do's and don'ts that you found useful with the airbrush in the comments. Thanks so much.